All right, so what I want to do today, and first of all, I need to say, pardon the noise if you hear a saw in the background. There is some work being done next to my house. On Teams, I'm able to make it so that that doesn't, that you don't really hear that background noise, but in this webinar environment, I don't seem to have a setting for that. However, it's not that frequent. In terms of what I want to talk about today, this is fairly informal, but feel free to put any comments you have in the chats or any questions that you might have. And if we have time, we can work through those. If not, we will definitely follow up with them. We can follow up with you either personally, or I can follow up with you, or we can follow up on those topics in another webinar, as we have several coming up. What I want to talk about today is understanding the dependence on reporting within the nonprofit world for things like tracking your funds and analyzing outcomes, things like that. I want to touch on some of the pieces that we can use in Business Central or Business Central adjacent to facilitate that. So as a whole in this series, we're looking at just how Microsoft in its kind of greater realm of a cloud-based solution with a lot of the rest of the Microsoft stack, how that can be leveraged, particularly because they have such excellent pricing for nonprofits, for one thing, but also because there are some things that have kind of come up that really might make it a bit easier to do some of those things. And what we have really right now is we have some fields in Business Central that are critical to facilitating some of that data analysis or some of your reporting. So I definitely want to touch on some of that. And then I want to talk about some of those analysis and reporting options that you have within the Microsoft stack. And of course, if you're interested in learning a bit more about this, you can feel free to reach out to Jody. I think that I see Corey on there. Corey might already be on Microsoft Business Central. So hopefully this will give you some ideas where you can take that in terms of your reporting. So first of all, the first step to any reporting is obviously making sure you're collecting the correct data. So some of the things that we can use in Business Central are things like dimensions, statistical accounts. There are also other things you can use, even if you happen to be a nonprofit that works in inventory. You can use things like item attributes that can facilitate some of the things you're doing as well. So there are a lot of ways to actually pull that data together. It's just important that before you get started reporting that you're actually collecting the correct data. And then the next thing that you really need to do is consider the best reporting options for your organization. So sometimes this could vary by the individual or the team, but what you're looking at is, sometimes it's easier to create a Teams channel and share out that way. Sometimes it's easier to just have reports delivered to BC users, so you can schedule your reports to run if you just want a PDF report, or to email. Those are also options as well. A lot of companies will share reporting on SharePoint or use Power BI. So from a data wrangling standpoint, so we talk about getting started and how it's important to make sure you're collecting the correct data. You also then need to wrangle that data into something that's going to be meaningful. And so in this case, what we'll talk about is just sort of the most basic, which of course is Excel. And what I like to talk to on the Excel side, I just like to speak to that ability to easily get your data into Excel, if that is an area where you're going to do some of that analysis. Some of the other things we have are Business Central financial reporting or financial reports. So these were previously called account schedules in NAV, and even in earlier iterations of BC, they were called account schedule. Now they're called financial reports, and there are some things that we can do with those financial reports, not just in terms of dimensions, which we'll talk about, but also now in terms of statistical accounts. So we'll talk through that a bit. We'll also talk about the Business Central, the analyzer or analyze, as you'll see in some of the screens. This is something that was rolled out in the most recent release of Business Central, that folks even using Business Central might not even be aware that it's there or how that could be useful. And then finally, I want to be sure we touch on Power BI, which is a great way to be able to create those reports, pull data from your Business Central data sources, or you can even merge data between BC and other data sources within that Power BI world. So we'll want to touch on that a bit as well. And then how can those reports get shared out? So a lot of different options here. that we can use. And again, the important part is just to make sure that you're collecting the right data, and then you figure out what's the best mechanism for delivering that information to end users. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started on the demo. So I've got a demo environment here that I've been using for a bit, not as long as I'd like to collect a lot of data or get a lot of data in the system, but we will use this to go through the things that I want to talk about. So first of all, important to data collection are going to be dimensions. This is something that as we're doing those setups in Business Central, when we go through an implementation, sometimes this is an area that's a little bit challenging for some companies to grasp. From a nonprofit standpoint, it might look even a little bit easier because you're used to looking at things like programs, projects, departments, things like that, and knowing that you have to actually collect data across those measures as well. I could even add a dimension specifically for example, for, my grants, that's really going to be, okay, I want to track then as I spend or as I'm collecting those ledger entries across my data, I want to know which grant that gets applied to. And so what you're doing, and I'll come back and set up some values under my grant, but just to take a look, you've really got dimensions set up, and then you're creating dimension values within that. So I can come in here and say, okay, so if I'm looking at my projects, these are all of the projects that I have set up right now. This can be unlimited. In Base BC, in terms of dimensions, you can create 10 dimensions, but just know that within this, the values can go on as much as you want. Another thing we can do within this is we can say, I want to set up not just my dimension values, so I might have my programs set up here, but within those values, I might actually want to set up allowed combinations. And so I can set up account type default dimensions, but I can also set up what are the values allowed per dimension. So I can look at, I've got an account, I've got certain accounts sitting out here. These are the values that are permitted for these GL accounts. So you're able to permit specific values, and you can even set up some sort of a matrixed approach to thing. I can also, for specific tables within the system, set up default dimensions and allowed values for that. So it becomes something where I say, hey, if I've got a program or if I've got a category where my value, my dimension values are in here, and I've got education, food, healthcare, and housing, where essentially I am able to then within this create a sort of, again, a matrix where I know that only certain things can post with education or post with food, so that we're working through that and then allowing specific values when a user is completing those entries. And we'll look at that a little bit more. So if I come to my grants here, then I would create dimension values perhaps for different grants. So I could put in something like Target, and then this might be, Target Foundation grant 2023, and then I can set up multiple. Again, within this, I can have unlimited values. So I've actually done implementations where, they'll go on, you're adding values routinely. So I might have hundreds of actual grant values in here, but this will give me the opportunity to be able to report against those specific grants. So it's one way to get those set up so that I am not under, say, my programs account having to create multiple grant accounts, one for each grant or something like that, right? Or one for each program. So this is allowing me to then over here on my, if we go a little bit further, if I'm coming down to something like expenses and I'm looking at program expenses, I don't necessarily want to have program expense for, say, nutrition, program expense for education, or anything like that. I want to be able to report on program expense, but specifically according to those different dimensions that we have set up. So if you come from like the GP world, for example, you might actually have account numbers that are sort of linked together through dashes. And sometimes, a lot of times, that's what companies are using to sort of show those different things, but that can actually create a very long chart of accounts. So dimensions are a way to be able to do that slicing and dicing and reporting without having to create an account for every sort of combination of dimensions that you might have. Another thing that we have in Business Central, and I'll actually, well, there's two different things. It's called statistical accounts. There are two different ways that you can set these up. One is using an extension. So this was the way that we were doing it before. So if you come out here, I've got my meals served, my learners reached, participants, applicants, things like that. So I can set up these different statistical accounts to gather data that's not really financial data. I might later use this data to do some things like look at, okay, my specific program, let's divide that between meals served to come up with the spend that we had for that. And so that's one way to do it, and that's through an extension that actually Stoneridge had created specifically for statistical accounts. And that was in part because we had a lot of GP users who were looking at moving over to Business Central, and they were accustomed to being able to capture that data, and there wasn't a mechanism for that. There is now a mechanism for that in base Business Central, and that's called statistical accounts. So this also came out with that April release. So we had several things that we're going to look at, well, a couple things at least that came out in that April release. In this particular scenario, then, I'm able to create statistical accounts and then create journals to post those things to. And if you look at this, I've got my meals. So this would be meals served, perhaps. I can actually create dimensions with within this specific statistical account that will always work with it, right? So category is always going to be food, nutrition. My project is going to be this one. If I were to, for example, add categories, or I have an account that's got multiple categories, what I can do is I can set up multiple allowed values. So in this particular case, my category is going to be education always for this specific statistical account. But in terms of program, I can have literacy or tutoring that both apply to that education or to this this learner's statistic. I can post for both the literacy and tutoring programs in this learner statistic. And then of course it can apply to these projects. I can have actually a much longer list. So as I grow my projects or programs, I can certainly always add those allowed values. But those are good ways to prevent users from posting things that might not be the correct dimensions. Now you can correct dimensions if you need to once you've got them in the system. So that's something that actually came out a few releases ago. And then within my statistical accounts, I'm able to, just to point out, I can see that statistical account balance. So this is going to show me the transactions that have happened against that account, and that's taking me to statistical account ledger entries. So those are two of the big things that I like to point out in terms of, as you're starting to think about how you want to report on data, think about both the dimensions, and then think about also the statistical accounts that you might want to set up. If I want to post to a statistical account, I'm using a statistical account journal. I can get here just by saving that, by looking it up, or I can get to that statistical account journal from within that statistical account as well. So this one's bringing me out to applicants, but I can set them up with different accounts like this. But so I've got my applicants, but I've also got learners, meals, volunteers. So those are all accounts that I'm using. And then basically within here, I can see, okay, this is going to be the ST400. I'm going to say this was maybe in my description, this might have been a Meals on Wheels type of effort that we did. And so for my amount in this particular scenario, I've got, this is how many meals. So I might say we served, 221 meals on this day for that particular project and program. And so from here, then I'm putting in things like my department code. I can put in, what specific project, which actually this one could be under, maybe this was under our food is life. This is under food, and maybe what program. So this might have been nutrition. So I can make sure I've got all of these dimensions that I need to capture within this, so that when I do go to report on this, I'll be able to do that. And basically, once you have the information in there for your statistical account, you can go ahead and register. Whoops, and that one just disappeared. I need to see, did I filter? Nope, I don't have a filter, so that should have registered. So what I can see basically is that I do have statistical account ledger entries being created when I make those transactions into the system. So you can see in that one, for some reason, I hadn't done one with the nutrition yet, so didn't like that. But you can see these are ledger entries that I've created through my statistical accounts, where I've got, you know, my food, my nutrition. This one went to this after school program. Oh, I'm guessing I did a wrong combination of dimensions that it didn't like. But in any case, this is what I'm going to be able to see here. Now you are able to, in Business Central, go ahead and export data directly to Excel. So a couple of things I like to point out are the ability to share data from something. So I could open this in Excel, I can share to Teams, I can copy link. Edit in Excel is something you've got here, but because this is ledger entries, you're not as able to make those changes. But just to point out, I can just send this data to Excel, or again, I could share it in Teams, or I could send a link to somebody. If they had you know, access to BC, they would be able to look at it directly in here. And this is going to open up my data in Excel. So from here, if you do have power users that are really your Excel power users, they may want to work with this data directly in Excel. And so they may come out here and say, yeah, I want to specifically work with a pivot table. Or they may want to use something like the Power Pivot, that you can do your Power Query within here. So there's a lot you can do once you pull that data out of here. Sometimes folks might already have something set up somewhere. They just want to grab this data, copy and paste it into another worksheet. Another thing you can do from within Excel, however, is I could go to my data and I can connect directly to tables. So I can go to get data and say, yeah, I want to go to my Dynamics 365 and I want to grab that BC data online. I can get to that data source, and so you're able to then pull data in directly, and then once you have that, and you'll see it'll go, it's probably going to want me to authenticate and so forth, but you would just make sure that you're authenticating. Usually it's going to use that single sign-on, so it will use whatever you have out there, and I can put in the URL then to that specific page with those statistical data ledger entries. I can put that in here, and it's going to allow me to connect to that. So if I have something set up that's got my pivot table and all of everything set up the way I want, I can just pull that data in, and then going forward from within Excel, you're able to just refresh and it'll pull that new data set in and then update whatever you have set up from the pivot standpoint. So you're really going to want to, just make sure that you've got your stuff set up. You should be able to find things in recent sources once you have it in here. So it will come out here. You can see I've got some set up to Business Central already, and that's just going to pull that data in directly from Business Central for you. So again, a couple of things. I can export or open in Excel. I could copy and paste this into something I already have created for that analysis, or I could have that analysis set up, pull that data in, and then just do a refresh each time. So whatever is easiest for you from the Excel standpoint, or with the folks you want to work with, or that are working with it. So a couple of things. You will have certain users that might want to do that kind of thing. A lot of times you'll find that folks on the accounting side have been doing things in Excel for a long time, so it makes sense for them. Another way to do some reporting in here is going to be using those sort of standard old-fashioned financial reports. And so again, these were originally called account schedules. If you've worked in Business Central, you might be familiar with these, or if you've ever seen previous demos that go into a bit more detail. But essentially what you're creating is you are creating column definitions and row definitions. So I've got row definitions here, I've got my column definitions here, and then you can see I can reuse those. So I'm mixing and matching my column and row definitions. I can also create formulas within these. So you can see this specific column definition is going to be my period and year to date with a % of total revenue, right? So that's actually putting in some formulas. So if I were to come into this one and say, if I wanted to edit that column definition, I could do that by actually pulling that up. So I can see this is what is in that column definition, right? I've got my column headers, I've got formulas. In this specific case, I've got a formula for my budget entries, and then I'm using this period to date. So you have different options in here, like, you know, do I want to show this? Maybe only when there's a value there or something. It's one that's really common. You also have different things that, well, just to point out, you can do formulas like this. I can also do comparison date formulas. So this gets into kind of a lot of that financial reporting side of things, but essentially if I wanted to come out here, I could create a financial report specifically across my programs, right? So basically I can put in some definitions for columns and rows, and then I can also put things in here like a double underline so that when I actually create this report or print it, it will show that double underline. And then again, I can have formulas. So I might want to calculate totals. This would be rows 10 through 40. That's what I want in my totals. And then maybe I'm pulling in then another one. I'm pulling in my program's posting account and then creating a formula that divides, okay, what's the total up here by that posting account. So that's just a basic example. You might be more likely to say, well, these statistical accounts are going to be, you know, different. So I might actually create separate reports for perhaps a learner's option versus something like a meals option, right? Because I don't want to necessarily calculate that entire program expense against all of those. But just to give you an idea of some of the things that you can do in your financial reporting, where now, just to point out, you have this new option. So I've got the statistical account option that I didn't used to have here in my totaling type. So just to point that out, that gives you the ability to actually do some statistical reporting where you can work with your statistical accounts as well as your posting accounts in the same report and create reports that would work that way. Again, in this particular case, then you can also set up your column definitions that are going to work with that, right? So I've got my row definitions, and then I've also got my column definitions. So I'm using that net change one, but I might want to use a different column definition in here as well, or create a new column definition. So that's just to point out, there's, you know, you can set up, again, mix and match those rows and columns. And again, in this particular case, I set up row definition for the statistical accounts. I might want to change what I've got in that column definition. One thing you can do with column definition is if you look at, for example, we look at column definition, I can set things up that will do things like current period -1 or current period -2, that kind of thing. And I can use my formulas, you know, so this could be current period here. I can create, actually, I think it would be over here, my current period, and then I can do, whoops, it's not, comparison date formula, date from CP. Oh, should include a number. So that's what it's going to be, -1. So my current, yeah, sorry, my formula for my date would be here, right? And then over here, I can say, okay, this is going to be CP, and then I would use that -1 for my date formula, right? And that's going to take me, and I can do that with months too. So if I want to create something that shows my current month, but I want to show the 12 months prior to give me all of the past 11 months aside from this month, and then basically 13 months back, I could create 13 columns for something like that that will show me then across the board each of those. So it's important to learn to use some of these formulas. One thing, again, if I were to come into here and just type something that's wrong, one hint that I always use for people is, you know, if I say DP, when you, and that is actually an okay formula, but if you use a formula that is incorrect, then it will actually alert you to that. So that's a good thing also to keep in mind, that when you're seeing things like, and that's thinking I'm putting in a column, when I'm putting in things like date formulas and it doesn't like them, what I can do is get to that help by having it come up and looking at this, right? So it's going to show me these are the things that you're allowed to use, and then you can include those numbers with them as well with your comparison dates. So just to point that out, you can use those date formulas in your column definitions. That's one where you may want to, you may want to dig into some of those formulas. And again, I just always recommend to come out and look at some of the things that are already out here. This is going to, this will be very useful for you. These are all things that are already canned. Again, within this, you can create things also using those statistical accounts, and then you can also use those dimensions to facilitate that. So moving on to something that is another new feature in Business Central is, if I come out to my general ledger entries, but elsewhere within the system, anywhere you've got entries or columns or data like that, there's this new feature called Analyze. If you happen to come out, for anybody, if you are already using Business Central and you don't see this, sometimes when there are features introduced and you're not actually seeing them on the screen, you can come out to Feature Management and see if you've actually got that one set up for use. So this analysis mode, you would want to make sure that that one's enabled to be able to see this. But it is, like I said, going to allow you to analyze from within the system, and it's going to save these analyses for you. So I can create these analysis reports for different programs. It's going to show me in this view all of the data, so I can click to start a new one. It's going to show me everything that I have there. But from within here, I can use my column filters and my analysis filters and create the columns that I want to see. So this is going to show me all of those columns that are available in here. It's also going to show me the things I can filter in. And another thing it will do is there is a pivot mode. So you are able to go ahead and do a little bit of, pivot work within here using some of those things that you've already created in terms of filters. So I can set some analysis filters. I can pull things down. I can pull specific rows down, or, if I wanted to, pull down my category code, I can pull certain things down. So that's going to now pull that category code down for me. And I could even say, yep, well, I've got category code in there, but I don't want to see the blank category code. So that's something I would be able to come in here and actually say, nope, I don't want to see the blanks. So I can say, well, just the ones that are non-blank in there. And then that's going to go ahead and start doing some of that pivot for me. So again, you do have pivot mode also available in here, and you're able to then save these with whatever title you want. So I can say, okay, I want to call that one pivot. And again, I'll be able to see these reports that I have sitting out here. Much like in Excel, I can also delete. So if I want to delete that one, so now I've got one for nutrition, one for pivot in this particular context. Again, if I were to leave, and then, whoops, I want to leave to something else. Nope, I keep going to my reports. If I were to leave this and say go to statistical accounts and then come back to my general ledger entries at first, from there, I will see again that list of GL entries. But once in there, so now I'm just seeing that full list, but once in here, I can go to Analyze, and it's going to save anything that I already had out there. And again, if I had created something, if I want to create something new using that data, I just click on plus and I can add another tab to do some analysis. So this allows me to save those reports or those analyses directly within Business Central. The other big reporting piece is Power BI. So just to take a quick look, so you'll see that Power BI, if we look in here, I can actually have a Power BI report visible directly in Business Central. So in this particular scenario, I am looking at a Power BI report that I have set up to do some of the analyses on those statistical accounts using the dimensions and so forth, right? So I can see this directly in here, but I may actually want to get to that Power BI report to perhaps look at it in a larger view using expand, or maybe I want to set some, do some filtering on it, that kind of thing. I can do that here then through this manage mode. And this is going to show me then that Power BI report and all the available tabs that I have within here, right? So I can come and look at this report, what I have set up, and then I can do some slicing and dicing within this as well, or make some changes that I want to. I can also do some filtering and things if I go to that expand. This is going to be based on any report that I've got created here in Power BI that has been essentially shared with me. I am going to be able to access there. A couple of things I like to point out are within Power BI, again, as I mentioned, it's extremely easy to connect to your data sources. So to do that, you can go to recent sources if you've already been connecting to something in Business Central, or alternatively, you could go to Get Data. And from here, I would go to my analysis, oh boy, Get Data, and I'm going to go to More, and from here I am going to go to my online services, and I'm going to grab my Business Central, and this is going to pull up, then it's going to connect to my Business Central, and it's going to pull up those various environments that I have access to, and then from here I can just connect to anything that I've got set up in this specific area. So you've got a couple of different options with advanced APIs, standard V2O, web services, legacy is what I'm using here. And so I've got all this stuff available to connect to. So if you do happen to see things, I've already connected my statistical data, a lot of the other stuff, dimensions. I could add dimension set entries if I want to here. It's going to show me a preview of what data I'm looking at. If I wanted to do some transformation from directly in here, I would be able to do that, or I can just go ahead and load that data set. So now I have access to that data set from within this particular area. And right now it's connecting and it's updating all of those other tables as well as I go through this. So again, it's as easy as that to connect this data. I could also, if I had, say, data from another source, maybe I've got something else and I'm saving that into a spreadsheet, but I want to be able to connect that. Maybe I've got some specific volunteer information that's created through another database or another environment. I can also then say, hey, get data. Maybe that's in Excel. I can look for an Excel workbook and then add that to this specific data set, right? So if I had store receipts that I wanted to add to this or something else, I can add those payroll data, things like that, and then just pull that into this same environment. So if I wanted to do my food, although that might be a very big data set. And then the other thing to point out here is what you're doing is you're creating that data model where basically once I've come out here and I've said, okay, now I'm looking at my food data set, what do I want to add to this? And so I am going to cancel that one because I know that that's a massive food data set. But what you're doing is within that data model, you're just letting the system know, how do I connect these different pieces of these tables, right? So when you run into something where it's not identifying a key, basically you just need to make sure that, hey, if I've got something like my dimension and I want to link this table with this one over here, what I want to do is say, okay, so this dimension code here is linked to this dimension code here. right? So I'm just letting it know that those are two things that need to actually be linked together. There are other ways to do that. It will actually come up if it doesn't, if you attempt to have data sources from different systems or even with the same system, that they're not automatically linked in here. It's going to let you know that. And so another thing it might do is actually ask you how you want to connect it. So that's something that you can see as well. And you would basically have a little screen come up that's going to say, yep, how are we connecting these two? So that's just a little piece about how you're doing some of that setup within here. Of course, I can see the underlying table. You have obviously in Power BI, for those that haven't created these reports, you do have full flexibility in how you see things on the screen, right? So you can see I'm seeing my posting date up here, but here I'm just seeing the months, right? And so that comes down to the difference between something like using this in the posting date, using the date hierarchy versus, and so date hierarchy where I'm looking at just that month versus over here where I'm just using that posting date. I can also change the names of these columns as well. So if I'm in here and I say, hey, I've got posting date sitting there, I can either rename this over here. That will appear in any place. It will update that name. Or I might just over here say, nope, just for this specific visual, I just want to say, what is the date posted, right? So I can change the name of that. So there's a lot that you can do specifically within Power BI to make these look the way that you want them to look. And then also I can change, you know, what am I looking at here in terms of my my specific chart that I'm using. I can also click on an area in one chart and have it then, these are all working together here, have it then for all of those other pieces, those are going to be linked together and it's going to show me those entries for each of those that are applicable. So in my housing, these are the 3 entries. It's showing this is under the rental assistance, and then this was my total for June was 75. So it's showing me that information in this area. I just like to point out that, you know, this is a great way to be able to create those dashboards within within Business Central or within Power BI. And then again, I can share these out both in Business Central, so that in Business Central, as I mentioned, I'm able to pull up anything that I have access to. And so if I were to go back to this and look at the Power BI report area, I have it showing that specific set. So I'm looking at yes, and again, some of the things I can do in Power BI to go through this, or look at my different months, if I'm filtering by month, that kind of thing. I can do all of that right here if I want to, or I can again go out to expand or manage. In terms of selecting reports that are available, I can actually select, like I said, from any of those Power BI reports that I have in my workspace, in my Power BI workspace, and that's not my desktop workspace. That's my Power BI workspace in the cloud, or any other things that may have been shared with me. So I'm able to come out and select any of these reports that I have out there and then view those directly here within Business Central. And again, I can get to those reports. If I wanted to go look at this one, I can expand this report from there as well. So you're able to get to all of that information. And again, my forecast versus booked and whatever other data that I have set up, data or visuals that I have set up in the table. So that is using that Power BI piece. And again, I can also look at those in Teams. So I can, within my Teams channels, I can have a Teams channel that is set up specifically for my Business Central. I may have certain things that I'm looking at specifically over in Teams. And again, I would be able to then, within that channel, I can look at things like either my Business Central in that Teams channel, or I can, so if I'm going to share this over, or I can look at reports that I might have set up. So if I come over here, you can see this is connecting specifically to my Business Central from within Teams. And that's going to pull that data up. that it's accessing in this particular channel, those sales orders. Or the other thing I might have is, like I said, some Power BI content that I'm sharing out in Teams. So those are both options that to be able to see directly here within our Teams channels. So that's a great way to be able to save and share that data with folks that don't necessarily need to use Business Central all the time. So I don't want to necessarily have a Business Central license for them, but I can have that basic team license so they can see that data. Or in the Power BI world, to be able to, yes, if I want to have this desktop version and create these reports, that's one license. But if I'm somebody who just needs to be able to consume that information, I can do that much more cost effectively than having to do that.